Let me read to you a passage from the 10th chapter of St. John's Gospel, verses 11 to 18. It's the Gospel for what the Church calls World Day of Prayer for Vocations, which falls on the fourth Sunday in Eastertide. The passage is for the Gospel for Year B of the fourth Sunday. St. John writes, Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired man is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired man and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them in also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. That's from John chapter 10, verses 11 to 18, on the fourth Sunday of Eastertide, which the Church takes to be Vocations Sunday. It reminds us of Christ's pastors, the shepherds of Christ's flock. You know, it could be argued that the most remarkable European country of the first half of the 16th century was Spain. With Isabella and Ferdinand, and Charles and Philip, Spain had great monarchs. But Spain was also the source of a vigorous Catholic life in the direction of spiritual and ecclesiastical reform. It saw the appearance of John of Avila, Ignatius Loyola, Teresa of Avila, and John of the Cross, to name but a few of the many outstanding Spanish saints of that period. Under their impetus, the Church of Spain became highly oriented towards pastoral renewal. It became an effective shepherd of souls. That is to say, the unseen Christ was manifestly the good shepherd of his sheep. Consider one example, John of Avila, from 1500 to 1569, born in the Diocese of Toledo. At a Franciscan friar's advice, he took up philosophy and theology at Alcalá, where he was fortunate to have as his teacher the famous Dominican de Soto. After his ordination, he celebrated his first Mass in the church where his parents were buried. He sold the family property and gave the proceeds to the poor. He hoped to serve as a missionary in Mexico, but was induced by the Archbishop of Seville to remain and work in Andalusia. His first sermon was preached in July 1529, and immediately his reputation was established. Crowds thronged the churches at all his sermons. Following false charges that brought him before the Inquisition, he began his career as apostolic preacher of Andalusia at the age of 30. After 9 years in that province, he returned to Seville, only to depart for the wider fields of Cordova, Granada, Balsa, Montilla, and Safra. For 18 years before his death, he was the victim of constant illness, the results of the hardships of his apostolate for 40 years. He was declared venerable by Pope Clement XIII, beatified by Pope Leo XIII in 1893, canonized by Pope Paul VI in 1970, and declared a Doctor of the Church by Pope Benedict XVI in 2011. Among the disciples attracted by his preaching and saintly reputation were St. Teresa of Avila, St. John of God, St. Francis Borgia, and the Venerable Louis of Granada. St. John of Avila's works were collected at Madrid in 1618, 1757, 1792, and in 1805, his best known works being the Audi Filii and his spiritual letters. Now this was the story of an outstanding shepherd of Christ's flock, one in whom Jesus Christ was made present as the good shepherd of God's people. Many others could be mentioned. The point about them, though, is that it was the one good shepherd who was present in them, bringing his grace to mankind. Another who could be mentioned lived 300 years later in France. John of Avila was a secular priest. So was John Vianney, the curé, parish priest of Ars. He was a spiritual prodigy in terms of love for God, zeal for souls, and effectiveness especially in the confessional. He died in 1859, known throughout Europe and well beyond for his pastoral zeal and sanctity. William Ullathorne, the Bishop of Birmingham in England, where Blessed John Henry Newman lived and served, had visited Ars to meet the holy priest. He had seen pilgrims living in the fields, waiting to take their turn in the line for confession in the parish church with the holy curé. Again, we are speaking of a good shepherd who was the fit instrument of Christ the Good Shepherd, unseen but working through him, through that curé of Ars, through those saints, for the salvation of souls of that time and place. All of this brings us to our gospel today that I read earlier from John chapter 10 verse 11 to 18, selected by the church for what it calls Vocations Sunday, or Day of Prayer for Vocations, which falls on the fourth Sunday of Eastertide. On this day the church especially thinks of the call of Christ for labourers in the vineyard. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, gave his life for each of us, so that we might live in union with him now and forever. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. He knows each one of us, and he has loved us, each of us, to the end. St. Paul writes that Christ loved me and gave himself up for me, Galatians chapter 2 verse 20. Very importantly, the same Paul writes that I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God. It is Christ the Good Shepherd, whom the shepherds of Christ's church bring to man. He, Jesus Christ, the grand protagonist of man's redemption. I am the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. The call, ever ancient, ever new, is to draw close to the Good Shepherd, to accept his invitation to personal friendship with him, and to join with him in spending ourselves for the salvation of mankind. This we do in diverse ways, depending on our particular calling and our particular circumstances. Whatever be our calling, though, the Church invites us to take to heart her need for holy pastors, for saintly priests, praying for this intention and supporting in Christian love her priests and their labours.